Chapter 9. Birth, Death, and Betrayal. Under King Jaehaerys I. Targaryen would prove to be as restless a king as ever sat the Iron Throne. Aegon the Conqueror had famously said that the small folk needed to see their kings and queens from time to time, so they might lay their griefs and grievances before them. I mean for them to see me, Jaehaerys declared, when announcing his first royal progress late in 51 AC. Many more were to follow in the years and decades to come. During the course of his long reign, Jaehaerys would spend more days and nights guesting with one lord or another, or holding audience in some market town or village, than at Dragonstone and the Red Keep combined. And oft as not, Alysanne was with him, her silvery dragon soaring beside his great beast of burnished bronze. Aegon the Conqueror had been accustomed to taking as many as 1,000 knights, men-at-arms, grooms, cooks, and other servants with him on the road. Whilst undeniably grand to behold, such processions created many difficulties for the lords honored by royal visits. So many men were difficult to house and feed, and if the king wished to go hunting, nearby woods would be overrun. Even the richest lord would oft find himself impoverished by the time the king departed, his cellars drunk dry of wine, his larders empty, and half his maidservants with bastards in their bellies. Jaehaerys was resolved to do things differently. No more than 100 men would accompany him on any progress, 20 knights, the rest men at arms and servants. I do not need to ring myself about with swords so long as I ride Vermithor, he said. Smaller numbers also allowed him to visit smaller lords, those whose castles had never been large enough to host Aegon. His intent was to see and be seen at more places, but stay at each a shorter time, so as never to become an unwelcome guest. The king's first progress was meant to be a modest one, commencing with the crownlands north of King's Landing and proceeding only as far as the Vale of Arryn. Jaehaerys wanted Alysanne with him, but as her grace was with child, he was concerned that their journeys not be too taxing. They began with Stokeworth and Rosby, then moved north along the coast to Duskendale. There, whilst the king viewed Lord Darkland's boatyards and enjoyed an afternoon of fishing, the queen held the first of her women's courts, which were to become an important part of every royal progress to come. Only women and girls were welcome at these audiences, highborn or low. They were encouraged to come forward and share their fears, concerns, and hopes with the young queen. The journey went without incident until the king and queen reached Maidenpool, where they were to be the guests of Lord and Lady Mouton for a fortnight before sailing across the Bay of Crabs Towakenden, Gulltown, and the Vale. The town of Maidenpool was far famed for the Sweetwater Pool, where legend had it that Florian the Fool had first glimpsed jonquil bathing during the Age of Heroes. Like thousands of other women before her, Queen Alysanne wished to bathe in Jonquil's pool, whose waters were said to have amazing healing properties. The lords of Maidenpool had erected a great stone bathhouse around the pool many centuries before, and given it over to an order of holy sisters. No men were allowed to enter the premises, so when the queen slipped into the sacred waters, she was attended only by her ladies-in-waiting, maids, and septas Edith and Lyra, who had served beside septa Isabel as novices, had both recently sworn their vows to become septas, consecrated in the faith and devoted to the queen. The goodness of the little queen, the silence of the starry sept, and the exhortations of the 7 speakers had won over most of the faithful for Jaehaerys and his Alysanne. But there are always some who will not be moved, and amongst the sisters who tended Jonquil's pool were 3 such women, whose hearts were hard with hate. They told one another that their holy waters would be polluted forever were the queen allowed to bathe in them whilst carrying the king's abomination in her belly. Queen Alysanne had only slipped out of her clothing when they fell upon her with daggers they had concealed within their robes. Blessedly, the attackers were no warriors, and they had not taken the courage of the queen's companions into account. Naked and vulnerable, the wise women did not hesitate, but stepped between the attackers and their lady. Septa Edith was slashed across the face, Prudence Celtigar stabbed through the shoulder, whilst Rosamund Ball took a dagger in the belly that, 3 days later, proved to be the death of her, but none of the murderous blades touched the queen. The shouts and screams of the struggle brought Alysanne's protectors running, for Sir Joffrey Doggett and Sir Giles Morrigan had been guarding the entrance to the bathhouse, never dreaming that the danger lurked within. The Kingsguard made short work of the attackers, slaying 2 out of hand whilst keeping the 3rd alive for questioning. When encouraged, she revealed that half a dozen others of their order had helped plan the attack, whilst lacking the courage to wield a blade. Lord Mouton hanged the guilty, and might have hanged the innocent as well, save for Queen Alysanne's intervention. Jaehaerys was furious. Their visit to the Vale was postponed, instead they returned to the safety of Maegor's Holdfast. Queen Alysanne would remain within until her child was born, but the experience had shaken her and set her to pondering. "I need a protector of mine own," she told his grace. "Your 7 are leal men and valiant, but they are men, and there are places men cannot go." The king could not disagree. A raven flew to Duskendale that very night, commanding the new Lord Darkland to send to court his bastard half-sister, Jonquil Dark, who had thrilled the smallfolk during the War for the White Cloaks as the mystery knight known as the Serpent in Scarlet. Still in scarlet, she arrived at King's Landing a few days later, and gladly accepted appointment as the Queen's own sworn shield. In time, she would be known about the realm as the Scarlet Shadow, so closely did she guard her lady. Not long after Jaehaerys and Alysanne returned from Maidenpool and the Queen took to her bedchamber, tidings of the most wondrous and unexpected sort came forth from Storm's End. Queen Alyssa was with child. At 44 years of age, the Dowager Queen had been thought to be well beyond her childbearing years, so her pregnancy was received as a miracle. In Aldtown, the High Septon himself proclaimed it was a blessing from the gods, a gift from the Mother above to a mother who had suffered much, and bravely. Amidst the joy, there was concern as well. Alyssa was not as strong as she had been, her time as Queen Regent had taken a toll on her, and her second marriage had not brought her the happiness she had once hoped for. The prospect of a child warmed Lord Rogar's heart, however, and he cast off his anger and repented of his infidelities to stay by his wife's side. Alyssa herself was fearful, mindful of the last babe she had borne to King Aenys, the little girl Viola who had died in the cradle. "I cannot suffer that again," she told her lord husband. "It would rip my heart apart." But the child, when he came early the following year, would prove to be robust and healthy, a big red-faced boy born with a fuzz of jet black hair and a squall that could be heard from Dorne to the wall. Lord Rogar, who had long ago put aside any hopes, loved her horse, her hounds, and her friends. On Dragonstone, the dragons became her friends. Her only friends, aside from Alyssa Farman. And she began to count the days until she could mounted one and fly far, far away. King Jaehaerys finally made his progress through the Vale of Arryn in 52 AC, calling at Goldtown, Runestone, Redfort, Longbow Hall, Heart's Home, and the Gates of the Moon before flying Vermithor up the Giant's Lance to the Eyrie, as Queen Visenya had done during the conquest. Queen Alysanne accompanied him for part of his travels, but not all. She had not yet recovered her full strength after childbirth, and the grief that followed. Still, by her good offices, the betrothal of Lady Prudence Celtigar to Lord Grafton of Goldtown was arranged. Her Grace also held a women's court at Goldtown, and a second at the Gates of the Moon. What she heard and learned would change the laws of the Seven Kingdoms. Men oft speak today of Queen Alysanne's laws, but this usage is sloppy and incorrect. Her Grace had no power to enact laws, issue decrees, make proclamations, or pass sentences. It is a mistake to speak of her as we might speak of the conqueror's queens, Rhaenys and Visenya. The young queen did, however, wield enormous influence over King Jaehaerys, and when she spoke, he listened, as he did upon their return from the Vale of Arryn. It was the plight of widows throughout the Seven Kingdoms that the women's courts had made Alysanne aware of. In times of peace especially, it was not uncommon for a man to outlive the wife of his youth, for young men most oft perish upon the battlefield, young women in the birthing bed. Be they of noble birth or humble, men left bereft suchwise would oft after a time take second wives. Hose presence in the household was resented by the children of the first wife. Where no bonds of affection existed, upon the man's own death his heirs could and did expel the widow from the home, reducing her to penury. In the case of lords, the heirs might simply strip away the widow's prerogatives, incomes, and servants, reducing her to little more than a boarder. To rectify these ills, King Jaehaerys in 52 AC promulgated the widow's law, reaffirming the right of the eldest son, or eldest daughter, where there was no son to inherit, but requiring said heirs to maintain surviving widows in the same condition they had enjoyed before their husband's death. A lord's widow, be she a second, third, or later wife, could no longer be driven from his castle, nor deprived of her servants, clothing, and income. The same law, however, also forbade men from disinheriting their children by a first wife in order to bestow their lands, seat, or property upon a later wife or her own children. Building was the king's other concern that year. Work continued on the Dragon Pit, and Jaehaerys oft visited the site to see the progress with his own eyes. Whilst riding from Aegon's high hill to the hill of Rhaenys, however, his grace took note of the most lamentable state of his city. King's Landing had grown too fast, with manses and shops and hovels and rat pits springing up like mushrooms after a hard rain. The streets were close and dark and filthy, with buildings so close to one another that men could clamber from one window to another. The winds coiled about like drunken snakes. Mud, manure, and night soil were everywhere. Would that I could empty the city, knock it down, and build it all anew, the king told his council. Lacking that power, and the coin such a massive undertaking would have required, Jaehaerys did what he could. Streets were widened, straightened, and cobbled where possible. The worst sties and hovels were torn down. A great central square was carved out and planted with trees, with markets and arcades. Beneath. Of having children by Alyssa, named his son Boromund. The gods give grief as well as joy. Long before her mother was brought to term, Queen Alysanne was also delivered of a son, a boy she named Aegon, to honor both the conqueror and her lost and much lamented brother, the uncrowned prince. All the realm gave thanks, and no one more so than Jaehaerys. But the young prince had come too early. Small and frail, he died 3 days after birth. So bereft was Queen Alysanne that the maesters feared for her life as well. Forever after, she blamed her son's death on the women who attacked her at Maidenpool. Had she been allowed to bathe in the healing waters of Jonquil's pool, she would say, Prince Aegon would have lived. Discontent lay heavy upon Dragonstone as well, where Rhaena Targaryen had established her own small court. As they had with Jaehaerys before her, neighboring lords began to seek her out, but the queen in the east was not her brother. Many of her visitors were received coldly, others turned away without an audience. Queen Rhaena's reunion with her daughter Arya had not gone well, either. The princess had no memory of her mother, and the queen no knowledge of her child, nor any fondness for the children of others. Arya had loved the excitement of the Red Keep, with lords and ladies and envoys from queer foreign lands coming and going, knights training in the yards every morning, singers and mummers and fools capering by night, and all the clangor and color and tumult of King's Landing just beyond the walls. She had loved the attention lavished on her as the heir to the Iron Throne as well. Great lords, gallant knights, bedmaids, washerwomen, and stable boys alike had praised her, loved her, and vied for her favor, and she had been the leader of a pack of young girls of both high and low birth who had terrorized the castle, all that had been taken from her when her mother carried her off to Dragonstone against her wishes. Compared to King's Landing, the island was a dull place, sleepy and quiet. There were no girls of her own age in the castle, and Arya was not allowed to mingle with the daughters of the fisherfolk in the village beneath the walls. Her mother was a stranger to her, sometimes stern and sometimes shy, much given to brooding, and the women who surrounded her seemed to take little interest in Arya. Of all of them, the only one the princess warmed to was Alyssa Farman of Fair Isle, who told her tales of her adventures and promised to teach her how to sail. Lady Alyssa was no happier on Dragonstone than Arya herself. However, she missed her wide western seas and spoke often of returning to them. Take me with you, Princess Arya would say when she did, and Alyssa Farman would laugh. Dragonstone did have one thing King's Landing largely lacked: dragons. In the great citadel under the shadow of the Dragonmont, more dragons were being born every time the moon turned, or so it seemed. The eggs that Dreamfire had laid on Fair Isle had all hatched once on Dragonstone, and Rhaena Targaryen had made certain that her daughter made their acquaintance. Choose one and make him yours, the queen urged the princess, and one day you will fly. There were older dragons in the yards as well, and beyond the walls wild dragons that had escaped the castle made their lairs in hidden caves on the far side of the mountain. Princess Arya had known Vermithor and Silverwing during her time at court, but she had never been allowed too close to them. Here she could visit with the dragons as often as she liked, the hatchlings, the young drakes, her mother's Dreamfire, and greatest of them all, Valerian and Vhagar, huge and ancient and sleepy, but still terrifying when they woke and stirred and spread their wings. In the Red Keep, Arya had. From that hub, long wide streets sprung, straight as spears, the King's Way, the God's Way, the Street of the Sisters, Blackwater Way, or the Muddy Way, as the smallfolk soon renamed it. None of this could be accomplished in a night. Work would continue for years, even decades, but it was the year 52 AC when it began, by the king's command. The cost of rebuilding the city was not inconsequential, and put further strain upon the crown's treasury. Those difficulties were exacerbated by the growing unpopularity of the Lord of Air, Rhaego Draz. In a short time, the Pentoshi master of coin had become as widely loathed as his predecessor, though for different reasons. He was said to be corrupt, taking the king's gold to fatten his own purse, a charge Lord Rego treated with derision. Why should I steal from the king? I am twice as rich as he is. He was said to be godless, for he did not worship the seven. Many a queer god is worshipped in Pentos, but Draz was known to keep but one, a small household idol like unto a woman great with child, with swollen breasts and a bat's head. She is all the god I need, was all he would say upon the matter. He was said to be a mongrel, an assertion he could not deny, for all Pentoshi are part Andal and part Valyrian, mixed with the stock of slaves and older peoples long forgotten. Most of all, he was resented for his wealth, which he did not deign to conceal but flaunted with his silken robes, ruby rings, and gilded palanquin. That Lord Rego Draz was an able master of coin even his enemies could not deny, but the challenge of paying for the completion of the dragon pit and the rebuilding of King's Landing strained even his talents. The taxes on silk, spice, and crenellations alone could not answer, so Lord Rego reluctantly imposed a new levy, a gate fee, required of anyone entering or leaving the city, collected by the guards on the city's gates. Additional fees were assessed for horses, mules, donkeys, and oxen, and wagons and carts were taxed heaviest of all. Given the amount of traffic that came and went from King's Landing every day, the gate tax proved to be highly lucrative, bringing in more than enough coin to meet the need. But at considerable cost to Rego Draz himself, as the grumbling against him increased tenfold. A long summer, plentiful harvests, and peace and prosperity both at home and abroad helped to blunt the edge of the discontent. However, and as the year drew to a close, Queen Alysanne brought the king splendid news. Her grace was once again with child. This time, she vowed, no enemies would come near her. Plans for a second royal progress had already been made and announced before the queen's condition became known. Though Jaehaerys decided at once that he would remain by his wife's side until the babe was born, Alysanne would not have it. He must go, she insisted. And so he did. The coming of the new year saw the king taking to the sky again on Vermithor, this time for the Riverlands. His progress began with a stay at Harrenhal as a guest of its new lord, the 9-year-old Maegor Towers. From there he and his retinue moved on to Riverrun, Acorn Hall, Pink Maiden, Atranta, and Stony Sept. At his queen's request, Lady Janice Templeton traveled with the king to hold women's courts at Riverrun and Stony Sept in her place. Alysanne remained in the Red Keep, presiding over council meetings in the king's absence, and holding audience from a velvet seat at the base of the Iron Throne. As her grace grew great with child, just across Blackwater Bay by the gullet another woman was delivered of another child whose birth, whilst less noted, would in time be of great significance to the lands of Westeros and the seas that lay beyond. On the Isle of Driftmark, Daemon Valerion's eldest son became a father for the first time when his lady wife presented him with a handsome, healthy boy. The babe was named Corlys, after the great-great-uncle who had served so nobly as the Lord Commander of the 1st Kingsguard, but in the years to come the people of Westeros would come to know this new Corlys better as the Sea Snake. The queen's own child followed in due course. She was brought to bed during the 7th moon of 53 AC, and this time she gave birth to a strong and healthy child, a girl she named Daenerys. The king was at Stony Sept when word reached him. He mounted Vermithor and flew back to King's Landing at once. Though Jaehaerys had hoped for another son to follow him upon the Iron Throne, it was plain that he doted on his daughter from the moment he first took her in his arms. The realm delighted in the little princess as well, everywhere, that is, save on Dragonstone.